Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Donovan Brooks. I am 29 years old, and I was supposed to get married last Saturday. That wedding never happened. The rehearsal dinner was where it died, and it died in front of both our families, our wedding party, and close friends, with white tablecloths, expensive wine, polished silver, and all the careful staging her parents loved. The restaurant was in Raleigh, the kind of place where the servers glided instead of walked, and every chair looked chosen by committee. There were about 40 people there that night, and by the end of it, every one of them knew exactly why I would never stand at an altar with Marissa Cole. The strangest part is that if you had asked me a week earlier whether I trusted her, I would have said yes without hesitation. I would have said she loved me. I would have said she defended me. I would have said whatever was wrong with her family stopped with them. I know how that sounds now. I know how blind it makes me look. But love has a way of turning repeated warning signs into isolated incidents, especially when the person you love is smart enough to always give you a softer explanation after the damage is done. I did not come for money, and I never pretended to. My father, Leonard, has been a mechanic for most of my life. My mother, Angela, is a nurse. They worked hard, saved carefully, and helped me get through state college without drowning in debt. I built what I have one step at a time. I work in technical support for a mid-sized company, and at the time all this happened, I was making about $55,000 a year. I was not rich, but I paid my bills, fixed my own car, kept a decent apartment, and had enough self-respect to think that should count for something. Marissa came from a different world. Her parents had country club memberships, a family attorney, they mentioned the way other people mention cousins, and a vacation home they spoke about like it was a normal extension of life. Her father, Calvin, paid for big things the way some people picked up the check at a diner. Her mother, Denise, could make a criticism sound like etiquette. Marissa worked in marketing at her father's company. She was good at presenting herself, good at smoothing over tension, good at making hard edges feel temporary. When I first met her through mutual friends, I told myself that none of that mattered because she made me laugh, and because when she looked at me in those early months, she looked proud to be with me. Looking back, the class issue did not begin with one dramatic insult. It came in layers, light enough to dismiss one at a time. Denise would praise a vendor I could not afford and then say, with a sympathetic little smile, that at a certain price point you simply had to manage expectations. Marissa's younger sister, Camille, once looked at my hands after I changed a tire in their driveway and said it was almost quaint that I still knew how to do practical things myself. Calvin asked me more than once when I planned to move up professionally, not in a curious way, but in the tone of a man checking whether a renovation would raise property value. There were jokes about my apartment furniture being basic, about my truck being charmingly blue-collar, about my parents clipping coupons like it was anthropological data. None of it came as one blazing insult. It came dressed as humor, or taste, or harmless observation. And every time I started to feel that old tightness in my chest, Marissa would touch my arm later and say, "You know how they are? Do not let them get to you." Sometimes she would even say it in front of them, lightly, enough to make me feel seen. At the time, I mistook that for loyalty. There were also moments that made me believe she was choosing me against all of that. Once, about a year into our relationship, Calvin made a remark at dinner about how financial stability mattered more than romance in the long run. Before I could answer, Marissa said, "Donovan has more character than most men I know. I'm not dating a trust fund." It was sharp enough that everyone laughed, and I remember the rush of relief I felt. Another time Denise suggested I rent a tuxedo from a place she approved of because quality shows, and Marissa rolled her eyes and told her mother I would look good in anything because I actually knew how to carry myself. Small things, maybe, but when somebody is slowly doubting whether he belongs, small things feel enormous. They become evidence. They become reasons to stay. By the time we got engaged, I'd built a whole private argument in her favor. I told myself she saw through her family's snobbery. I told myself she was stuck navigating them, not siding with them. I told myself that if I just stayed steady, if I loved her well enough, if I kept showing up, then the future would belong to us and not to whatever old poison shaped the way they looked at people like me. The truth is, there were cracks even inside that hope. About 8 months before the rehearsal dinner, I found out something I should have forced into the open sooner. A mutual friend from Marissa's college years, after 2 drinks too many at a birthday party, made an awkward joke about history repeating itself, and then went pale when he realized I had no context. I pressed him later, and, after a lot of hesitation, he told me there had been overlap early in Marissa's dating history with me. He said she had not been as cleanly finished with her past as she claimed. I confronted her that night. She cried hard, fast, and convincingly. She told me there had been a confused period when we were still new, when her ex kept reaching out, when she had made mistakes she was ashamed of. She swore it had ended long ago. She admitted to more than I expected, which made the confession feel honest. She said there had also been one horrible drunken encounter with a college roommate years earlier, a reckless secret she had never told anyone because it made her hate herself. She kept saying it was before she really understood what she had with me, before we were fully us, before she knew I was the man she wanted to marry. I should have walked then. Instead, I asked too many questions and accepted too many tears as proof of change. What kept me there was not stupidity, so much as investment. By then I loved her. By then I had already spent years learning her moods, her ambitions, the way she tucked herself against my shoulder on the couch after a bad day, the way she could sound almost childlike when she let her guard down. We went to counseling for a while after that conversation. She framed it as something she wanted because she did not want secrets between us. She apologized in careful, complete sentences. She said she had grown. I believed her enough to keep building. When she later snapped at Denise for making a comment about my parents' neighborhood, I took it as proof that she had chosen our side. When she kissed me after we toured venues and said she could not wait to marry a man who was real, I heard devotion, not foreshadowing. That word mattered more later than it should have. Real, authentic, grounded. She used those words about me often, usually in contrast to men she called polished or performative. I thought she was praising substance. I did not understand she also meant something else, something she could dress up as admiration in private and weaponize as class judgment in public the moment it suited her. Wedding planning made the differences between our families impossible to ignore. To be fair, the expenses were split more than people assume when they hear a story like this. Her family paid for the venue rental, the rehearsal dinner, decorations, and her dress. I paid for several of the vendors on our side of things: the photographer deposit, the florist, the disc jockey, smaller planning costs, and money I had been moving into a joint account for shared expenses and our future after the wedding. I had around $15,000 in that account. She had put in about $5,000. We had talked about moving into her condo after the wedding, and because of that I had already given notice on my apartment lease. So when people later acted like I had thrown away a ceremony someone else paid for, that irritated me more than I can explain. I did not walk away from fantasy that cost me nothing. I walked away from years of savings, practical plans, and a life I had been organizing around her. That matters because it is easy to be dramatic when you have nothing at stake. It is much harder to stand up, speak one sentence, and leave when you know the bill for your dignity will be real by morning. The week before the rehearsal dinner, there were 2 moments I kept replaying afterward. The first was at a family dinner at Calvin and Denise's house. Calvin was telling a story about one of Marissa's cousins dating beneath herself in college, and everyone laughed in that polished, careful way people do when the cruelty is part of the entertainment. I must have gone quiet, because under the table Marissa squeezed my knee and later, in the car, told me not to let them get into my head. "You know, I do not think that way," she said. I asked her directly if she was ever embarrassed by me. She looked stunned, almost offended. She said, "Donovan, I am marrying you." The second moment was the night before the rehearsal dinner when I saw an old photo box open in her condo office. There were college pictures, old ticket stubs, cards, and a few photographs she had clearly been sorting through. On top was a picture of her with the ex she used to compare people to indirectly, the one with private school manners and expensive shoes. She closed the box quickly and said she had been clearing out old things before the wedding. I remember wondering why that picture was on top, why she looked rattled, why I felt that same old unease and still chose to let it pass. The rehearsal dinner itself started exactly the way people imagine these things start. Nice lighting, soft music, too much champagne before the entrees. My brother, Micah, was there with his wife. My parents were dressed like they had practiced this for weeks because, in their own way, they had. My best man, Dorian, sat 2 seats down from me and kept giving me these steadying looks like he knew I was tense. Her side filled the room with expensive perfume and smooth laughter. Calvin gave a welcome toast that sounded less like he was gaining a son and more like he was announcing a strategic alliance. But it was not insulting on the surface, so I let it go. My father stood up after him and gave the kind of speech that lands because it is simple and true. He talked about being proud of the man I had become. He talked about the first time Marissa came over for dinner and how happy I looked after she left. He said he prayed marriage would give me peace, partnership, and joy. It was warm enough that even Denise had a smile through it. For a few minutes, it really did feel like maybe all the strain was in my head. Maybe we were going to get through the evening without one more reminder that I did not fit their definition of impressive. Marissa stood to speak after dessert wine had already been poured. She was about 3 glasses in, not falling down drunk, not slurring, just loose enough to stop editing herself. She started well. She told the story of how we met through friends and how I had made her laugh the first night because I was the only person at the table willing to say when the restaurant had overcooked the fish. People laughed. She talked about how steady I was, how dependable, how grounded. She said I had shown her what real love looked like. I remember smiling then. I remember thinking I would tease her later for being sentimental in public. Then she shifted. She mentioned her ex in this airy, almost joking tone. She said he had polish, that he knew how to move through rooms like this, that he had private school manners, spoke French, and always knew which fork to use. A few people gave strained little laughs. She lifted her glass and looked right at me. But Donovan is real, she said. Authentic. Even if, compared to somebody like that, he is a little low class. The sentence landed cleanly. There was no misunderstanding it. No one needed to ask what she meant. The room went dead quiet. In silence, you learn very fast who people are. My mother's face lost all color. My father's jaw set so hard I thought he might stand before I did. Dorian stared at Marissa like he had been waiting years to hear her say something unforgivable. Micah looked from her to me, already halfway out of his chair. Denise smiled automatically for one wrong second, as if Marissa had said something socially daring but charming, and then must have realized from the stillness around us that no one else heard it that way. Calvin did not rush to correct his daughter. Neither did Camille. A couple of Marissa's friends looked uncomfortable, but not shocked. That was the part that cut deepest. Not discomfort, familiarity. The feeling that the words were new, but the sentiment was not. I had spent 3 years trying to believe I was being oversensitive, that the little comments were isolated, that Marissa was separate from the culture of her family. In that one sentence, she made a liar out of every excuse I had ever used to protect her. And because the humiliation hit me cold instead of hot, I got very calm. I stood up slowly. My mouth had gone dry, so I took a sip of water before I spoke. I remember the glass clicking lightly against the plate when I set it down. Then I looked at her and said, very evenly, "You are absolutely right. I would never cheat on you like you did, multiple times, including with your college roommate. I did not raise my voice. I did not curse. I did not add anything theatrical. I just told the truth she had spent months begging me to bury and chose that moment to make sure nobody in that room ever mistook me for the only dishonest person in our relationship." Her face went white so fast it was almost unnatural. Denise gasped. Calvin's expression finally changed, but not into outrage at her, into fear of public damage. Marissa said my name in a whisper first, then louder, like volume could reverse what had just happened. I did not give her time. I looked at my parents and said, "Mom, Dad, let us go." Dorian stood immediately. Micah was already moving. My father pushed back his chair, so hard it scraped the floor. We walked out together, not in a dramatic procession, just in a line of people who knew staying would be a worse humiliation than leaving. Behind us, the room broke apart. I heard Denise saying, "What is he talking about?" in that sharp clipped tone she used when she wanted a private disaster handled publicly but discreetly. I heard Marissa say, "Donovan, wait," and then, more desperately, "That is not fair." One of the groomsmen muttered, "Man, no," under his breath as I passed. A bridesmaid I barely knew looked at me with something close to pity. Dorian caught up with me by the front doors and asked if I wanted him to drive. I told him no. I needed my hands on the wheel. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. My mother touched my arm and asked if I was sure I should leave right then. I told her there was nothing left to stay for. My father said, "You did right," in a low voice that sounded more furious than comforting. That helped more than anything. Marissa came through the restaurant doors just as I reached my car. She was crying now, but there was anger under it. "You humiliated me," she said. I looked at her and almost laughed at the nerve of it. "You did that yourself," I said, and got in the car. I could hear her calling my name as I pulled out of the lot, but I did not look back. By the time I got to my apartment, my phone was already vibrating so hard across the coffee table that it nearly fell off twice. I silenced it and sat on the couch in the dark for close to an hour. That was the first moment the full weight of what I had done started pressing down on me. Not regret, not even doubt, more like the physical shock of recognizing that the life I had been building no longer existed. The wedding was 8 days away. My suit was hanging in the closet. Gift bags were stacked near the wall. There were seating chart drafts on my counter. I had practical damage to handle before the grief had even sorted itself into a shape. Somewhere in that hour I realized something else too. I did not feel torn. Hurt, yes. Embarrassed, yes. Furious, absolutely. But not torn. Whatever love I still had for her had been connected to the version of her I had defended for years. The woman at that dinner had made that version impossible to resurrect. Around 11 that night, I called the wedding planner and left a voicemail telling her the wedding was canceled and I would take responsibility for the vendors I had paid. Then I texted Dorian and told him it was over. I finally lay down close to 2 in the morning. I did not sleep peacefully, but I slept from pure exhaustion. The next morning looked like a digital riot. Calls, texts, voicemails, messages through apps I forgot I even had. Marissa alone had sent more than 30 texts. The tone moved in stages: shock, apology, anger, bargaining, accusation. Her mother had sent a dozen variations of the same complaint, all centered on how I had disgraced them at the dinner, and how any decent man would have handled a private issue privately. Calvin had sent one message that said, "We need to discuss this like adults." My brother sent, "That was brutal. Call me when you are ready." Dorian's message just said, "I am with you." My mother had left one voicemail in the middle of the night asking me to tell her I was home safe. I called her first. She cried for about 15 seconds before pulling herself together and telling me I had nothing to apologize for. Then my father got on the line and said if Calvin contacted me again trying to bully me about money, I should let him know. That steadied me. After that, I called the wedding planner. She confirmed the cancellation and walked me through my losses. I would lose the venue deposit on my portion, the caterer deposit I was tied to, most of the florist fee, and part of the disc jockey payment. The photographer would refund half. By the time she finished the numbers, I was down roughly $12,000. $12,000 hurts differently when you know exactly how many paychecks, overtime hours, and skipped luxuries it represents. I asked what happened to the obligations on Marissa's side. The planner explained clearly that her family's expenses were separate: the venue rental balance, rehearsal dinner costs, decorations, and what they had already spent on her dress and other non-refundable purchases. Their total loss would be much larger, but it would be theirs. I appreciated the clarity because one of the most corrosive parts of that relationship had been the assumption that money changed the moral math. I did not care how much her family lost compared to me. I cared that nobody would later pretend I had destroyed an event funded entirely by their generosity. The planner, to her credit, kept her tone neutral but kind. Before we ended the call, she said, "For what it is worth, several people at dinner last night looked like they understood exactly why you left." It was such a small thing, but it made breathing easier. About 20 minutes after that, Marissa got through before I could block yet another number. She did not say hello. She said, "Are you seriously doing this?" I told her yes. She said I was throwing away 3 years over one comment. I asked her to explain how calling me low class in front of both our families was supposed to be interpreted, if not exactly the way I heard it. Her answer told me everything I needed to know. She said it was a joke. Then she said she had been trying to make a point about how I had more substance than men who only cared about appearances. Then, when I did not accept that, she snapped and called me sensitive. That was the moment any remaining softness in me shut off. A person who had truly understood what she did would not have needed 3 separate explanations in under a minute. I told her she could save the performance for someone still invested in believing her. She kept talking over me, saying we should meet in person, that her parents were furious, that things had gotten out of hand. Out of hand. Like this was weather, not character. I told her the wedding was canceled, and she needed to handle her side of the fallout. Then I hung up and blocked that number too. Once the immediate emotional fire was handled, I had to deal with practical damage. I called my landlord because I had already given notice, planning to move into Marissa's condo after the wedding. I expected to beg. Instead, he told me the couple who had been set to take the apartment had backed out the day before. If I wanted to stay, he could void the notice and write up a new lease on the same terms. I sat there for a second with my eyes closed after that call because it felt like one of the only mercies in a brutal week. The joint account was messy, eh? I went to the bank in person instead of trying to handle it by phone because I wanted no confusion. The representative explained that I could not unilaterally close the account, but I could withdraw the money I had personally deposited, since I had careful records of the transfers and the account had only been opened 2 months earlier for wedding and housing expenses. We reviewed the deposit history line by line. I pulled out my $15,000, left her $5, and opened a new checking account at a different bank before I walked out. It was not triumphant. It was tedious and slightly humiliating, like documenting the financial autopsy of a future that had already died. By early afternoon, I had secured my housing, protected my money, notified the planner, and blocked more numbers than I could count. That was when I finally called Dorian back. He came over that evening with pizza and sat on my couch without pretending any of this was normal. At one point, he said, "I have been waiting 3 years to tell you her family is awful." I asked him why he never did. He said because every time he almost spoke up, I looked too hopeful about the relationship, and he did not want to become the friend who poisoned something serious. Then he added, "But that speech last night? That was not new. That was just the first time they stopped dressing it up." Around 4 that afternoon, Calvin called from a number I did not recognize. He went straight to money. No greeting. No apology. Just a tight, controlled voice saying we needed to talk about the financial obligations I had triggered by canceling 8 days before the wedding. I told him I was handling the vendors I paid, and he could handle his side. He said the venue rental was non-refundable and the total loss on their end would be enormous. I said that sounded like a consequence of his daughter publicly humiliating the man she expected to marry. He tried a softer tone then, saying Marissa had made a mistake after too much wine and that adults could work through isolated incidents with counseling, postponement, and patience. I told him this was not an isolated incident. It was the first honest sentence in a long pattern. He said, "Do you know what kind of life she could have given you?" There it was, finally said plainly enough that nobody could pretend otherwise. Now what kind of life we could build. What kind of life she could give me, like I was turning down charity from a superior station. I told him I did not want a life handed to me by people who thought proximity to them was a favor. I wanted a partner. Then I ended the call and blocked him. Over the next few days, the pressure campaign began. Denise somehow got my work number by calling the front desk and pretending to be a client. She left a voicemail saying I was unstable, cruel, and clearly afraid of commitment. My manager called me into his office and asked, very gently, whether there was any personal situation likely to spill into work. I gave him a stripped-down version of the truth, enough to explain why random people might start contacting me. To my surprise, he was more sympathetic than annoyed. He told reception to send anything like that directly to him and not to me. 2 nights later, Camille showed up at my apartment building demanding to be let upstairs. The front desk called first. I told them she had no business there and to send her away. Apparently, she caused enough of a scene in the lobby that security had to escort her out. The next day, one of Marissa's college friends, accidentally, ran into me at a lunch spot I went to often. She lasted less than 2 minutes before admitting Marissa had asked her to talk sense into me. I told her there was nothing to make sense of. She tried saying people said terrible things when drunk. I told her that drunkenness lowers filters. It does not invent values out of thin air. The friend did not argue after that. She just looked embarrassed and left. The most revealing call came on Friday, the day before what should have been my wedding. Marissa used somebody else's phone again. I almost hung up when I heard her voice, but something in the way she sounded stopped me. Not because she sounded sincere, because she sounded tired enough to tell the truth by accident. She apologized more directly than before. She said the comment had been cruel, and she knew it. Then she ruined it by pivoting immediately to the scale of my response. Canceling the wedding, she said, was insanity. We could fix this. People got through worse. What about the honeymoon, the house we were going to buy, the children we had talked about? I let her talk until she was done. Then I asked her a question I should have asked a long time ago. When your mother talked down to my parents, when your sister mocked my truck, when your father kept asking when I would become more impressive, did you agree with them or not? She was quiet too long. Finally, she said, I thought they were being difficult sometimes. That was the answer. Not no. Not never. Not I defended you every time. I asked her if she ever once told them, in private, to stop disrespecting me. She did not answer that either. When she finally spoke again, she said she had only been trying to say I had substance. I told her that if substance was what she valued, she had a rotten way of describing it. Then I hung up and blocked that number too. Saturday morning, the day I should have been getting dressed for my wedding, I woke up later than usual and sat for a long time at the edge of my bed. Relief was there, but so was grief. I did not want to rewrite that part into a fantasy. It hurt. I had not just lost a person. I had lost routines, plans, imagined children, holidays, furniture we had argued about for a home we would never share, all the stupid specific pieces of a future that vanish before your mind can catch up. There was also humiliation in knowing 40 people had watched the relationship end like a snapped wire. But beneath all of that was something clean, certainty. I made myself breakfast, mostly because my mother would have asked if I had eaten. Around noon, Dorian came over with the other groomsmen. We ordered wings, watched a game, and let the day pass without making me perform heartbreak for anybody. At one point, they handed me a custom beer stein one of them had ordered weeks earlier as a wedding gift. He had scratched out the original engraving with tape and marker and written, "Still standing." That got a laugh out of me I badly needed. Later, my mother called and said she and my father had decided the money they planned to spend on my wedding gift would become a vacation fund for me instead. Then she told me Denise had called that morning screaming that I had ruined her daughter's life. My father had taken the phone and said, "We raised a man who knows his worth." That sentence stayed with me. Marissa tried to control the public story almost immediately. By that evening, she had posted something vague online about heartbreak, betrayal, and discovering who people really were. She did not mention my name, but she did not need to. People close enough to know there had been a canceled wedding knew exactly what she was doing. At first, I considered posting the truth. Then I realized I did not need to. The people who mattered had seen enough or heard enough for people in that room. Dorian told me one bridesmaid had called her boyfriend from the parking lot after the dinner and said, she really said that to him in front of everybody. One of the groomsmen told me 2 guests left the restaurant arguing about whether Marissa had always been that way or whether the alcohol just stripped the varnish off. My brother said one of Calvin's business associates had quietly asked him the next day whether the engagement had ended because Marissa had insulted me publicly. Silence, it turned out, was not protecting her. Truth was moving on its own. That mattered to me because one of the ugliest parts of being treated badly by polished people is how much power they usually have to manage optics. This time, the room had been too full, the insult too clear, my response too controlled. There was no believable version of events in which I had simply panicked over nothing. The first 2 weeks after the cancellation were the hardest. Not because I doubted myself, because harassment wears people down even when it changes nothing. Marissa sent a handwritten letter to my parents' house. My mother called and asked if I wanted her to forward it. I told her to throw it away. Calvin tried calling my father with a so-called man-to-man appeal about not letting emotions ruin a good match. My father told him his daughter had ruined it herself. A week later, I saw Marissa waiting outside a coffee shop I went to some mornings. She had clearly learned my routine from somewhere. I never even went inside. I turned around, got back in my truck, and drove to another place across town. I got texts from unknown numbers later accusing me of running away from closure. Closure, as if standing up and ending a wedding after public humiliation was somehow unclear. After that, I began documenting everything. Dates, numbers, screenshots. Not because I thought it would turn into a case. Because dealing with her family had taught me that people who rely on image often become careful only when they realize their behavior is being tracked. Once I started keeping records, the contact attempts slowed. Not immediately, but enough to notice. The financial consequences settled over the next month. My losses ended up just over $12,000. I will not pretend that did not sting. I had worked carefully to save that money. I had skipped trips, delayed replacing things I wanted, taken extra support shifts when they were available. But every time I felt sick about the number, I pictured staying. I pictured marrying into that family, letting that dinner become one more thing I swallowed, and then spending years paying for a larger house, nicer parties, better schools, more polished social circles, all while being reminded, subtly or bluntly, that I should be grateful anyone had elevated me into their orbit. Compared to that, 12,000 felt expensive but survivable. Their side lost much more. Between the venue balance, rehearsal dinner, decorations, and personal purchases already made, the total was close to 40,000. Denise apparently floated the idea of suing me, but even their own attorney told them they had no case. You cannot force somebody to get married after the foundation collapses. You also cannot sue a man into forgetting what your daughter said in front of witnesses. When I heard that through a mutual connection, I did not feel triumph. I felt tired. Their reflex, even then, was still to find a mechanism to make consequences somebody else's problem. Socially, the fallout landed about how it deserved to. Most of our mutual friends took my side once they understood the full story. A few stayed politely neutral and drifted away, which I accepted. One of Marissa's cousins actually sent me a message about 3 weeks after the canceled wedding. She said she had not agreed with how I handled the public cheating reveal, but she also said Marissa's comment at dinner had been indefensible and long overdue to catch up with her. That message meant more to me than the louder support because it came with nuance. It reminded me real life is not made of clean teams. People can disapprove of one part and still recognize the core truth. Around the same time, one of the servers from the restaurant reached out on social media to say he had been sorry for what happened and that the staff had all noticed how cruel the comment was. He did not claim anyone applauded me or anything ridiculous like that. He just said several of them were quietly relieved when I left because staying would have been worse. That felt real. It also matched how I remembered the room. Stunned, embarrassed, aware that a line had been crossed so clearly no amount of money or wine could smooth it over. Work became unexpectedly steady ground. My manager never mentioned the voicemail again after he handled it. A month later, I got a promotion I had already been in line for before the breakup, which mattered because I did not want my life turning into some cheap story where everything improved magically after one noble decision. The raise bumped me to around 63,000. Useful, welcome, not world-changing. Enough to remind me I was still moving forward on my own terms. I renewed the lease on my apartment for another year. It was not glamorous. It was mine. No one in that space commented on where my couch came from or whether my kitchenware looked refined enough for a registry. I fixed a cabinet hinge that had been bothering me for months. I changed the shower head. I started sleeping better. Small, ordinary things began to feel almost luxurious because they were unobserved. About 6 weeks after the rehearsal dinner, I met somebody new at a friend's barbecue. Her name was Asha. She was a teacher, drove an old Honda she openly complained about, and when I mentioned changing my own brake pads once, she said that was impressive because she could barely assemble a bookshelf. We kept it slow. I told her the story early because I had no interest in building anything on omissions. She listened without dramatics and simply said, "That was cruel. You were right to leave." There's a lot of peace in how uncomplicated that sounded. Marissa found out I was seeing someone eventually through overlapping social circles, and from what I heard, she did not take it well. I only half trusted the details because they came through too many people to count as clean fact, but apparently she had been telling friends I moved on too quickly and that it proved I never really loved her. That almost would have bothered me if it were not such a perfect example of her worldview. In her mind, consequences still needed to validate her suffering first. My moving on was not evidence that I had been done a long time before the dinner. It was theft of a storyline in which she remained the central wounded figure. The last significant contact attempt came in the form of a formal letter sent through their family attorney, warning me against spreading false statements about her cheating and damaging her reputation. I had not made any public statement beyond what I said at the dinner. A lawyer friend of Dorian's sent back a brief response stating that I had made no public campaign against her, and that any further unwanted contact would be documented as harassment. After that, everything finally went quiet. Not because they understood, because they had run out of leverage. A strange coda to the whole thing happened about 2 months later at a mutual friend's party. I ran into the ex Marissa had compared me to at the rehearsal dinner. We had only met once before, years earlier, and I would have been happy to avoid the conversation, but he came over and said he had heard what happened. There was no smugness in him, which surprised me. He said Marissa used to make the same kinds of comments with him too, always about status, presentation, family background, what looked right from the outside. I asked whether that was why he cheated, and to his credit, he shook his head immediately and said no, that part was on him. I was selfish, he said, but being with her family made everything feel like performance. It was one of the few conversations around this whole mess that did not feel neat. He did not excuse himself. He did not try to make me feel better with perfect lines. He just confirmed, in a messy, human way, that I had not imagined the culture I'd spent years trying to rationalize. We talked for 10 minutes, then moved on. That was enough. I did not need any more witnesses after that. I already had the only one that mattered. Myself, finally believing what I'd seen. It has been long enough now that I can tell the story without feeling my pulse jump at every part. I still think about the dinner sometimes, not because I miss her, but because I'm still impressed by how much can become clear in one sentence. For 3 years, I kept trying to separate Marissa from the quiet contempt of her family. I told myself she was different because I needed her to be. The rehearsal dinner stripped that lie down to the frame. She did not accidentally reveal the wrong thought. She revealed the right one, the one she had been carrying underneath every polished defense, every private reassurance, every compliment that depended on contrast. I was real to her, yes, authentic, grounded, but somewhere underneath those flattering words, she also thought I was beneath the men she considered finished products. When she announced that in public, she did me the biggest favor she ever could have. She made leaving simple. I lost money. I lost plans. I lost a version of the future I had spent years building. But I kept my self-respect, and once you almost marry into a family determined to make you grateful for being tolerated, you learn how valuable that is. I'm still a regular man with a regular job, a regular apartment, and a life nobody gets to hold over my head. That is enough for me. More than enough. She called me low class like it was the final word. It turned out it was just the last mistake she ever got to make with me in the room. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.